As a student, it took me a while to think about being a student seriously. Initially, I was at high school. I was a little bit naughty, I would say. Didn't take my studies too seriously, and then I don't know, something clicked when I was about 14 or 15. I started reading a lot, particularly literature. Really got interested in history and English. Ended up applying to study those at university. Became a history major. And the rest is history. I became a history professor, and those days seem a long time ago now. I did my studies in England. I did my undergrad and graduate degrees at Oxford, which was a place where you had a lot of autonomy as a student. You would basically, I remember just being given reading lists every week, and going away and reading, and then coming back and writing essays every week. So I read a lot and wrote a lot. And those just became ingrained habits, which obviously served me well later, I think. So I'm currently finishing writing a book on football, as we would say soccer, in communist East Germany. Interested particularly in the spaces that the sport and football in particular can create, to create distance from particularly authoritarian states. The East German regime was famous for its highly controlled sports system in the 70s and 80s. For those of you old enough to remember, East Germany was winning as many Olympic medals as the Soviet Union and the United States. Very small country. But they could never really control football as easily. Football there, as in most other places in the world, was the most popular game among players and fans. So I'm interested in the way in which the game can speak to different identities other than state-based identities. So individual, local, regional, national, sometimes even transnational. Yeah, so football was interesting in terms of the state in communist countries sponsored sports clubs and football teams. So you'd have a team that was sponsored by the secret police, a team sponsored by the army, by the railway workers, and so on and so forth. And those, the interesting thing is the way in which players and fans in particular, appropriated these teams and created their own identities that weren't really about loyalty to the communist state, but were about loyalty to a local community, for example, a town or a district within a town, that fed into age-old regional rivalries within historical Germany, and in some cases at least, teams that created identities that were, if not in opposition to the state, at least removed from the state. So there were spaces in which players and fans could articulate alternatives, limited alternatives maybe, but alternatives nonetheless. I mean, there's lots of discussion, I think, about what resistance entails under authoritarian regimes, and there's resistance that is very active and proactive, but there's also resistance which is a kind of there's a word in German, it's actually the word resistance, but it means essentially immunity. So where the state's influence has limits and borders. And what I've also found in my research is that even in very authoritarian regimes, the state is not a monolith. It's not a unified actor. There are rival groups within it, and football, which was very popular among communist politicians as well as among ordinary citizens, was a classic case where local rivalries, personal interests could come ahead of socialism sometimes. I think the most exciting part of my research is seeing how a subject that at first hand seems quite small is in fact a vast subject, and that still resonates today. I mean, one of the interesting things about studying contemporary history is that you get to, aside from working in archives, you get to talk to people. So some of my research is focused on talking to players and coaches and fans who lived under that system, under communism, and who are now still around, often still involved in football in unified Germany, and can look at the changes, both good and bad, that have happened since Germany was reunified. So I think the fact that that my history feels like it's a kind of a living, breathing entity makes it seem current and relevant, and something that I can talk to a lot of different people about, which is nice. And football always opens up many doors. You can talk to taxi drivers, you can talk to people on the street, you can talk to historians, but you can talk to everyone about sport. It opens doors.